Got to tell the lady that I got it. Here we are. So we're going to do a little bit of both. Also want to call your attention that those of you who are interested in continuing with preparation for conversion to Judaism should send an email to my assistant, Sharon Hine, and Jackie will post the email address, just indicating your interest in doing so. Rabbi Jenny, our assistant rabbi, will be the one who will follow up with you and then give you a sense of the flow of that process. I know that some of you have participated in this course without showing yourselves on the screen, and that is acceptable up to this point. But if you wish to participate in the process of conversion, you will need to interact at a personal level with Rabbi Jenny, and that would mean both on by computer or by personal meetings. We hope at some point in the near future, after 2022, to open up the synagogue to Sunday morning conversations classes. So Rabbi Jenny will follow up with you in that regard. Also, qualifying for continuing with conversion will necessitate having participated fully in the Hebrew component of this Sunday morning series with Dina David. That series will be completed this next Sunday with the last session, but you will continue to experience Hebrew, of course, in the ongoing process of preparation for conversion for those of you who are interested in doing that. The best way, however, to continue to refresh and rejuvenate your Hebrew knowledge is by participating in the life cycle experience of the synagogue. That means attending services whenever possible, either by live stream or in person. Rabbi Jenny will explain to you some of the requisites associated with the ongoing preparation for conversion. And I would like to state here what we stated at the very beginning of the course, that participating in this series neither commits you nor us to the completion of the conversion program. So that's a decision that is reached individually between you and the sponsoring rabbi and congregation. It's been a pleasure to converse with you on Sunday mornings, and I look forward to today's session. And since the title of today's session is in fact the life cycle or the stages of life, I'd like to begin assuming that you have watched the video of Refreshing Judaism on that subject with an open microphone. Let me first ask, how many of you have attended any ceremony of Jewish life cycle nature, among those especially who are interested in conversion to Judaism? I know that Jim and Martine have done so, but the others among you, have you had an opportunity to attend or participate? Jim, would you care to share with us what that was?
I've only by Zoom, but I've attended or at least witnessed several B-mitzvahs. So
good. So participating in Shabbat services.
Shabbat service, yeah.
You have witnessed the bar, the bat mitzvah ceremony, and that, of course, is something that happens traditionally at age 13, when, according to the sheet, the stages of life sheet that is in the website, an ancient 2,000-year-old passage from the Mishnah, at 13, ben shlosh esre la mitzvot. A person who reaches the age of 13 is now responsible for the observance of the mitzvot. Hence the name for the ceremony, bar or bat mitzvah, one who is subject to the mitzvot. The term bar or bat, which means son or daughter, and the plural is bnei or benot, doesn't mean genealogical descendants or children. It means a category of people who are subject to a certain identity. For example, we say that the people of Israel in the Bible are called Bnei Israel. Literally, we translate that as children of Israel. It doesn't mean that this is a pediatric alliance, right? We're not the children in the sense that we're a pediatric group. And it doesn't mean a genealogical descendants either, because you can become a member of Israel through, as many of you are interested in doing, through conversion, adoption into Judaism, right? So the category Bnei, Benot, means in Hebrew, bar or bat in singular, means a member of a constituency. There is a national, international Jewish organization called B'nai Brit, means members of the covenant. So the word B'nai, Benot, bar, bat can have a genealogical nature to it, ascendancy, descendancy, but it really means a member of a group. We are B'nai Israel, the members of the community of Israel. So that's what happens at age 13, that a young person assumes the responsibility, mitzvot, of being part of that. I like to translate the word mitzvah as responsibility or duty or obligation. In the more traditional sense, it means commandment, out of a traditional belief that the observances, both the moral and the ritual, are commanded by God. You can interpret that differently and see it as an assumption of responsibility or duty. Okay, so that takes care of the bar and bat mitzvah. I should mention that the age of bar mitzvah at the age of 13 pertained originally to the male, to the boy child. In the 20th century, the ceremony of bat mitzvah was introduced. And it was introduced by Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, although there seem to have been some incidents of such a celebration among the Jews of Italy earlier in the modern period, and other European or progressive communities. But the notion of a young woman becoming a bat mitzvah with full participation in the life cycle of the synagogue, being called to the Torah, begins in 1922 with the daughter of Mordecai Kaplan. Her name was Judith Kaplan, later Judith Kaplan Eisenstein, and she was the first documented American, at least, person to celebrate what would become a bat mitzvah. And it was a more limited participation. Young girls in the synagogue today, and many synagogues today, do exactly what the young men do in terms of participation in the service. In the 1920s, it was a tentative entry. So the young woman was called to read something, to give a talk, and so forth. So it differs from synagogue to synagogue, but the concept of bat mitzvah as an equivalent to bar mitzvah is now the norm in the non-Orthodox Jewish community. Okay, what else do we need to know? Any other ceremonies, anybody? Well, in the Jewish life cycle, just like in anybody's life cycle, we go through certain distinctive stages. Anybody ever taken a course in Introduction to Anthropology? And you studied rites of passage, right? Rite de passage. And there's a lot of literature about that. So we are all born somehow, and we are all going to die, regardless of our opinion on the matter. The events that take place between those two moments are marked in civic life, in personal life, in family life, communal life, and in religious life. In the religious tradition, particularly in Judaism, there is what we try to do is to give to some of those key moments a dimension of what we would call kedusha, or holiness. They just don't happen. You just don't become an adolescent. You just don't get married. You just don't become a parent. You just don't die. These moments are noted and sanctified in community with rituals that elevate the significance. And what I call that, and what we call that, is to elevate the ordinary to the extraordinary, to give to that moment in life a quality of kedusha, which means holiness. So when a child is born, there are, you can just wrap up the kid, bring him home or bring her home, and that's it. And when the child reaches pubescence or adolescence, you can just, sometimes have a conversation, sometimes not have a conversation, and life continues. And then people graduate, and then they fall in love, and then they establish relationships. And you can either take note of those or not. Sometimes those relationships fail and they break, and there's a divorce. And then there are issues to attend to. And then you grow old. You gain wisdom. You retire. You enter into a different stage in life. All of these moments require some recognition. Ritual becomes an important mode of capturing the significance of something that is very transient, very transitory, because these moments in life don't just happen. In a way, you have to capture them. So what ritual does is that it takes the liminal experience. Have you heard that word, liminal? It's an anthropological term, sociological term. Liminal is that which exists in the between of different concrete moments or experiences. Liminal is the less concrete. It's the transitional moment. After the death of a loved one, we enter into a liminal period of being in between the death, the loss, and the transition to an acceptance and understanding of the new reality in our lives. The same thing with falling in love. The whole thing of falling in love is a big liminal time, right? The whole world changes for people, but then you concretize that, and you concretize it in a ceremony of commitment, which takes the liminality, the transience, the fluid nature of it, and gives it some more concrete expression. And that's where rituals come in. Rituals are ceremonies that are designed to give to a transitional moment a concreteness. A graduation. You can finish high school, you can finish college, just move on. But there is something significant about going to an event, receiving a diploma, having your name be called out, having recognitions, etc., etc. So that's what a life cycle ritual does to an otherwise just growing up or transitioning moment in life. And different religions have different ways of marking those events. And civil society has it also. You learn how to drive. You don't just, get up the next day and take your parents' car. You have to pass an exam. You have to get a document, a license. So in a way, that's bar mitzvah, that's a wedding. Or death, you need a certificate. It kind of concretizes the moment. And religious life seeks not only to concretize the moment, but to give it an aura, a dimension of holiness. Makes it distinct from every other experience, every other moment. Any questions? We can talk about specifics. What happens when a Jewish child is born? And notice what I said. A Jewish child is born. A Christian child is not born. A child is born who is baptized a Christian. A Jewish child is born. Meaning, if you're traditionally, if your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish at birth. It is not something you acquire. It is something you inherit. In the Reform and Reconstructionist movement, if either parent is Jewish, you can claim Jewishness and be raised in a Jewish household. But in the traditional sense, the Jewish identity is matrilineal. So a Jewish child is born. How do you welcome that child into the Jewish fold? You don't have to do anything. That child is Jewish. Whether that child, if he's a male, whether he has a circumcision or not, that child is Jewish. The circumcision does not make the child Jewish. The circumcision is a token of welcoming the child into the covenant, into the covenant Brit. That's the name that you give to the ceremony. Brit Milah, the covenant of circumcision. You welcome the child into the Jewish community. Covenant means the community of the compliant, the community of the participants. So on the 8th day, a boy is circumcised. Usually the name is given to the child at that time. In the case of a girl, there is a ceremony of naming that can be done. Some people do it on the 8th day, some people do it later when mom and dad have a little bit more chance. There's not the urgency of getting the surgical procedure done, which is optimally done medically on the 8th, after the first week of life. So the child is circumcised, the name is given, or the female child is named at the synagogue in the circle of loved ones and friends. What you do is you welcome the child to the community, but the child is already a member of the community. So this is a celebratory event. Different ceremonies have been suggested for the welcoming of the child, of the female child, since we do not circumcise female children. Some people have developed the tradition of like a mikvah for a female child, or just a washing of the feet, or wrapping the child in a tallis. All kinds of symbolism. These are the symbols. Ritual is concretized through symbol. Whatever you do, you signal that you are now welcoming that child, and then you pronounce a name over the child. So in English, the child might be known as Julius, but in Hebrew, the parents want to name this boy after a grandparent or great-grandparent whose name was Yehuda. Judah, in Hebrew, Yehuda. So a Jewish child generally has an English name and a Hebrew name. The English and the Hebrew name might be the same. You know, if you're called David, your Hebrew name is naturally David. But I've seen cases where you have a Hebrew name for your English name and a different name altogether for your Hebrew name. If your name is Adam, that's a good Hebrew word, Adam. If your name is Michael, that's a good Hebrew word, Michael. So many names in our Anglo vocabulary come from the Hebrew because they're derived from the biblical tradition, right? And then it's customary to add to the first name, and sometimes there's a middle name as well, the expression ben or bat, son or daughter of, and then you give the Hebrew names of the parents. Mother, father, as you go along. In the case of a person who converts to Judaism, one adopts a Hebrew name at the moment of conversion. And this is a conversation you can have with Rabbi Jenny, or you can talk a little bit about it now. The Hebrew name that you adopt can be a name of a person in Jewish history that you admire, or a person that you have come to know in your Jewish connections, whose name you want to perpetuate. And then it is customary in the case of a person who adopts Judaism for purposes of the religious identity to give the person the name Ben or Bat, son or daughter of Abraham and Sarah, Avraham Besarah, indicating that that person is now fully integrated into the Jewish experience, going back all the way to the founding parents, Abraham and Sarah. So that's a conversation that you can go ahead and have later. Begin to think about a name that you might want to consider. So Jim, what is your, I presume that your full name is James.
Correct.
Okay. Do you know the origins of that name?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's related through some changes to Yaakov.
Correct.
Yeah.
The name James is the Latinized Greco-Roman version of the name Yaakov.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know what it ends up being in Spanish? It's a very interesting transition.
Well, I know it went through the name Yago.
Right.
And then is it Diego? Or is that a nickname?
It's Santiago.
Oh, okay.
It's Santiago. And it's kind of a blending of the name Saint Yaakov.
Mm-hmm.
Santiago becomes Santiago in Spanish. And it is the name of Saint James.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
The Christian Saint James is known in Spanish as Santiago. Ever heard of the pilgrimage that many people take in Spain, the Santiago de Compostela trail? Well, Santiago means Saint Jacob or Saint James. So a good equivalent for you would be Yaakov. But I know many Jameses that also go by the Hebrew name Chaim, which means life, because James has assonance with the word Chaim, which means life. But it doesn't have to be either of those two. So you're free to choose a Hebrew name. Philip, do you know what your name means? It's a Greek name, right?
Yes, it means lover of horses. However, I will say my middle name is actually Michael.
Oh, there you go.
So
you can consider using that as your Hebrew name or something like that. Yeah. Now, Philip, Philippon, name of Alexander the Great's father, right? So it means lover of horses. There is a Hebrew word for horse, and actually there's a famous rabbi known by that name in the Talmud. The Hebrew word is sus, S-U-S, sus. And there's a famous rabbi, Susia. So, and Rabbi Susia is considered to be a great, pious, and wise person. Rabbi Susia would say to his disciples, when I die and I appear before heaven, God will not ask me, Susia, why didn't you live up to be like Moses? God will ask me, Susia, why didn't you live up to be Susia? So it's a name of proud identity, Susia. Anybody else would like to explore a Hebrew name while we're at this? Courtney or Cora? Okay, yeah.
I was thinking about Leah.
Leah? Yes, for any particular reason?
Just kind of her background. And I like the name in general, so.
Good. Leah is a very dominant name in my family. My mother's name was Leita, and that's a diminutive of Leah. And both of my grandmothers on my paternal and my maternal side, their names were Leah Florence and Leah Madeline. So Leah is a very dominant name in my family tradition. It's a beautiful name. Good. Anybody else? Well, names are very important things to think about. One of the biggest,
Rabbi,
yes.
I do have a follow-up question. I've seen some converts to Judaism have chosen two names. Is that customary, or is it more common to stick with one?
It really doesn't matter. You can choose one or you can choose two. You can choose many people have two Hebrew names, like they have, two English names.
Sure,
If
sure.
you'd like to adopt a first and second Hebrew names, you can certainly do that.
Okay.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about naming. We reflected a little bit on the bar and bat mitzvah. One thing that we should say is that symbolic of the assumption of mitzvot, at the age of bar bat mitzvah, the child dons for the first time the prayer shawl, which we know as the talit. The fringes at the end of the talit are reminiscent of the mitzvot. And if you have seen a talit, it is not all the little fringes, but 4 corner fringes that are tied in a specific way that allude to the number 613. It's kind of a ritual macrame, you can think of it. And so that is symbolic of the 613 mitzvot. Go into a Jewish informational book and read about the tzitzit. That's the name for the fringes of the talit. If you have not consulted or had this book, this is a very, very good resource, and I commend it to all of you. Essential Judaism by George Robinson. It's really a nice little anthology of practical stuff, both historical, ritual, life cycle, even organizational, and we will go into that, how the Jewish community is organized, the role of the synagogue, the role of secular institutions, and so forth. Okay, so a child is born, a child grows up into adolescence in the Jewish tradition, in addition to the bar and bat mitzvah ceremony, especially in the liberal community, there is a ceremony at the age of 16, generally 10th grade, 9th, 10th grade, called confirmation. That ceremony was adopted very much from the European Christian tradition by Jews during the Enlightenment. And it is just signals kind of a completion of Jewish studies. It's kind of a little collective recognition, graduation from religious school type event that kind of puts the icing on the bar and bat mitzvah that took place 2 years before. Then kids continue, they go to college. Hopefully they'll associate with Hillel or some other Jewish organization, stay connected, et cetera. And then the next time we hear from them is when mom and dad call and try to schedule a wedding, and we then begin to talk about marriage plans. 2 significant issues that have become very resonant and important in Jewish communal life in the last several decades is the ascendancy of intermarriage in the Jewish tradition, where a Jewish child opts to marry a person who is not Jewish, and then that may involve conversion to Judaism. In some cases, it does not involve conversion to Judaism, and congregations and Jewish communities have become more and more open and receptive to the inclusion of the non-Jewish partner or the partner who has chosen to be Jewish. There are different practices and different movements and different communities as to the role of the synagogue and the rabbi in those ceremonies. This is something that as time unfolds and you need to talk about, we can talk about more. The other, of course, is same-sex marriages and different gender identities and partnering among couples and the role of congregations and religious leaders in facilitating and participating and counseling and guiding that. All of the movements, except for the Orthodox movement in Judaism, recognize same-sex partnerships, and in fact, there are rabbis who are lesbian or gay, or any place in the LGBTQ plus TQ fluidity, who are ordained and are active rabbis in the Jewish community. So these are things that are a little bit easier to live out in the Jewish community than in many other religious communities. Many Christian communities are still struggling with these issues, certainly in the Muslim world and the Jewish Orthodoxy. But even in Jewish Orthodoxy, there is a kind of a greater openness and acceptance of the person into the community, regardless of identity. As the family grows, children then come into the family, and we enter into the cycle again of naming and celebration and bar mitzvah, et cetera, et cetera. Should there be a divorce in the Jewish couple's life, Jewish tradition also has a ceremony or a ritual to recognize that religiously, even as it has taken place civilly. Before a Jewish divorce or Jewish religious divorce is granted, the rabbi must see proof that there has been a civil divorce. Then there is a ceremony which consists of writing of a document known as a get, G-E-T. The word get simply means a written document, and it is prepared expressly for the occasion, and it is presented by one partner to the other, either in person or through the agency of a rabbi or another person. And that document spells out that the marriage that was entered under Jewish law and tradition has now been terminated, and the partners are free to remarry again under Jewish law and tradition. While Jewish tradition does not celebrate divorce, it does consider it a necessity under certain circumstances, and marriage is not intended to be a prison. Marriage is intended to be a liberating environment, and if a couple cannot grow together, it is important that they grow individually, even if that means apart. And apart means different things to different people after a formal relationship has been terminated, because often children require that there be a continuation of the relationship at some level. In the Jewish tradition, illness and death that are not necessarily correlated with one another are important moments in life cycle intervention. One of the significant things that rabbis do is do counseling and visitation during times of illness. We remember the ill in our community during services, prayers, offer prayers of healing. I should establish, for purposes of clarity, I do not see the prayer as affecting cure. The purpose of the prayer is an expression of the concern and the love of the community, solidarity with the person. Jewish tradition would not counsel that you pray and not go receive medical treatment for whatever your situation is. Okay? Jewish tradition, in fact, requires the intervention of medicine because the body is considered to be the holy vessel of the soul, and hence requires sacred care. So the notion of not receiving medical care would be considered contrary to the ethical teaching of Judaism. To say, let's pray that you be healed without seeking medical intervention or counseling or any necessary form of therapy would be considered contrary to the tenets of the Jewish tradition. The moment of death, of course, is a painful experience for all people, and religious traditions have ways of dealing with that. funerals, mournings, preparations in the Jewish tradition. Anybody been to a Jewish funeral? No, I'm officiating at a funeral this coming tomorrow. Jewish funeral is a rather poignant and not long service. My typical Jewish funeral lasts about half an hour, whether at the memorial hall or at the graveside. Sometimes there is a memorial service followed by a graveside interment. Sometimes the entire ceremony is done at the graveside. It is a very simple and humane procedure. Mourners are encouraged to participate in bringing their loved one to his or her final resting place. There's a Jewish custom of throwing earth over the casket at the end, which many people find initially difficult to do, but then afterwards very healing, kind of an act of closure. But the ceremony itself the funeral ceremony consists of traditional psalms and readings and passages, a eulogy. The word eulogy means, anybody knows the meaning of the word eulogy? What does it mean to eulogize somebody? It means to say nice things. Eulogos means, you means beautiful, as in euphemism. Euthanasia means beautiful. So you speak about the person, and the eulogy is supposed to fulfill two purposes. One, to honor the deceased, and the other to comfort the mourners. You will find that Jewish eulogies tend to be less theological, less, kind of bringing God into the situation, and now this person is in God's hands and God willed it. You don't find too much of that in a Jewish eulogy. Rather, it is a lament that the person has departed, if lament is indeed necessary, or at least an acknowledgement of the loss regardless of the circumstances. And it is both an opportunity to remember, to honor the deceased, and to bring comfort to the mourners. In the Jewish tradition, officially, mourners are members of one of 7 degrees of relationship. Parents, which means mother, father, children, son, daughter, spouse, or siblings. 7 categories. Sibling, parents, children, siblings, and spouses are mourners for one who has passed away. The others are in grief, but they do not have the responsibilities of the observance of mourning prescribed by the Jewish tradition. And that the structure of the mourning process in the Jewish tradition is that after the funeral, there are 7 days known as Shiva, during which the mourners are helped by the community to emerge from the heavy grief. Sometimes the death of a loved one, especially in our times when people live for many, many longer years and they die after a beautiful life. So mourning acquires different meaning. Grief acquires different meaning for different people. So grief is the feeling, mourning is the process. So 7 days, and then there is an extension of that 7 days into 30 days, known as Shloshim. And here at the synagogue, we will list the names of deceased members of the congregation or family for 30 days in our remembrance leaflet during services. And then for parents, one continues to be a mourner. That is, for one's parents, one continues to be a mourner for the period of 11 months from the time of the funeral. And then there is a gap between the 11th month and the anniversary, at which time the anniversary is marked in the Eastern European Ashkenazi tradition that is known as Yortzeit. It's a Yiddish, German word that means year mark, right? So you have the Yortzeit at the anniversary of the death. So whereas the Shiva and the Shloshim are marked from the time of the funeral, the Yortzeit is marked on the date of the death of the person. And then every year thereafter, there will be an observance of the anniversary of death. And customarily, families will light a 24-hour memorial candle on the eve of that anniversary to memorialize the deceased one. After the funeral, a candle for 7 days is lit, and that's called a Shiva candle, 7-day candle, because it lasts for the period of Shiva, which means 7. Shiva means 7, and the period is referred to as the period of Shiva. So 3 stages in mourning: Shiva, Shloshim, 30 days, and then the anniversary at the end of 1 year. Those are the stages in Jewish mourning. Throughout the year, at certain holidays, there is also a memorial service known as Yizkor, which means remembrance, and that happens during the 3 major festivals: Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and Yom Kippur. In the Sephardic tradition, only on Yom Kippur. In the Ashkenazi tradition, the 3 festivals as well. And these customs developed at different times, mostly during the Middle Ages. The onslaught of the Crusades and persecutions and pogroms heightened the need of communities to memorialize. So there were occasions of memorials. So that is pretty much the life cycle. And then we die. Anybody seeking an exemption? Nope. Okay. I can't help you with that, but the Jewish tradition does provide for ways of living with that reality individually and in community. And there are different beliefs about afterlife in the Jewish tradition, from the most orthodox to the most liberal. I encourage you to read about that. For some people, there's a more tangible experience of life in an afterworld and afterlife. For other people, the notion of an immortality of the soul, the remembrance of the human being, the living on of the memory and the influence and the love of that person from generation to generation is what we call immortality. Among Orthodox Jews, traditional Jews, there is a belief even in the resurrection of the dead at the time after the coming of the Messiah. In the Jewish tradition, there are 2 stages of end of history. The Messianic times. The Messianic times are this worldly. It is the perfection of human society now in this world. And then Olam Haba, the world to come. And there is no one opinion about that in the Jewish tradition, but that is posterior to history, so to speak. And the fact is that Jews don't spend as much time arguing about these matters as many a Christian do, and Muslims. Judaism is more of a this life-centered religion and experience, although for some Jews, these issues are very real and very present. But doctrinally, Christianity and Islam dwell much more on end of time matters and afterlife matters than preoccupy the typical Jew today. So that's my excursus of the life cycle. Any questions or comments or anything that needs fleshing out? Yes, do I see a hand there? Courtney? No, I see a hand. Okay. Any comments, questions? Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about Jewish community, which I had intended to do.
Yeah, I do have a question, Rabbi,
Oh, yeah.
about the different ways of looking after life.
Yeah.
Is there a book that you can recommend? Is there any resources?
Yeah,
you
there are a lot of books. There's a book called What Happens After I Die,
Uh-huh.
and it is written by two authors, Rifat Soncino, Soncino, and Daniel Syme, Syme. What Happens After I Die. And then there is a book by Gilman. Oh, the first name escapes me, and I know him well. Rabbi Gilman, Gillman. It's called The End of Death. It's a little bit more traditional. In What Happens After I Die, there are a variety of points of view presented. And it's meant actually for, even younger readers that you can share with. If you want to read about mourning practices and consolation in the Jewish tradition, there's a wonderful book by Diamond, the same author of some of the books that you have, Anita Diamond, Diamant, and it's called Kaddish, and it's about Jewish practices of funeral and mourning.
Could you repeat the name? Parish?
Anita Diamant, Diamant. She's the author of one of the Intro to Judaism books that you will find in our list as well.
And what was the name of the book?
The book, I think, is called Kaddish or Reciting. If you go on Amazon, Anita Diamond, you'll find it.
Okay, I can find it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Those are some good resources.
Thank you. Thank you.
And in any comprehensive Jewish life cycle book, there's going to be a good section about Jewish mourning practices, including this book. Okay, Jewish community. Let me begin working backwards, give you a little bit of a sense of Jewish communal life in the United States as it is today. We Jews are a very organized, disorganized people. That means that there's a great deal of diversity in the Jewish community. Different organizations, different religious tendencies, orientations, and at the same time, we're hyper-organized. There are organizations for everything. For purposes of Jewish community, the main bodies or structures of Jewish life are synagogues and what is generally known as Jewish federations. Jewish federation constitutes the secular arm of the Jewish community. It is generally constituted by lay leaders, elected representatives of the community, whose role is to raise funds to maintain Jewish institutional life. So here in Indianapolis, if you go on Hoover Road, in the building which houses the Jewish Community Center, there are the administrative offices of the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis. The Jewish Federation is a fundraising arm, kind of a united way of the Jewish community, and it allocates funds to the Jewish Community Center, to the Jewish Home for the Aged, to the Jewish Family Services, to the Jewish Community Relations Council, and to some Jewish educational endeavors, including some allocations to the Hebrew Academy, which is a private institution here in Indianapolis. It's an affiliate institution, but not a constituent institution of the Jewish Federation. So there's the Jewish Federation. They have each organization has its own board. The Jewish Community Center has a board. The Jewish Community Relations Council has a board. The Jewish Family Services has a board. And then the Jewish Federation has an umbrella board that has representation from those organizations and from a myriad other Jewish organizations in the city, Hadassah, B'nai B'rith, different groupings, and representatives from the synagogues. But the synagogues are independent entities from the Jewish Federation. We are not regulated or maintained financially by the Jewish Federation. So synagogues or congregations are self-sustaining. They have their own boards. They have rabbis and clergy and educators and staff. And that is maintained by the voluntary contributions of members of the congregation and occasional programs and fundraiser events that make Jewish life possible. We run religious schools, Hebrew schools, to which children come to be educated and socialized Jewishly. So the synagogue is the core religio-cultural institution of the Jewish community, and the Federation is the core secular, organizational, structural institution. Federation and synagogue cooperate, but are distinct entities. There is no influence of the Federation on the synagogue. The synagogue participates in the board of the Federation, but does not dictate to the Federation particular modes of Jewish practice, etc., etc. Because the synagogues, of which there are about 5 or 6 in Indianapolis, have different orientations, different views, different practices, differently trained rabbis. The rabbis among themselves have an organization called the Indianapolis Board of Rabbis. And then the rabbis, who are the senior rabbis of congregations, also participate in a periodic conversation with the Jewish professionals who head the agencies of federation. And we call that the Jewish rabbis, the rabbis and Jewish pros organization. By Jewish pros, we mean the executive director of the federation, the executive director of the day school, the executive director of the Jewish Community Center, and so forth. So we meet on a purely consultative basis to share ideas, to propose programs, to create a kind of a consensus. A lot of Jewish life is on the basis of consensus, right? So we follow a kind of a democratic structure with representation. Jews who are active part of the Jewish community are expected to help support that Jewish community. So to practice Judaism is to impose upon oneself a form of self-taxation. You support the institutions. People will support the Jewish Federation and make contributions. People will support the synagogue and pay synagogue support, dues, whatever they're called. In addition, the Federation and the synagogues maintain a tangible connection with the Jewish people and community outside of Indianapolis. So much of the fundraising and the programming of Federation and synagogues will be to support indigent Jews in different parts of the world, or to maintain contacts and cooperative relations with Israel, not with the Israeli government, but with non-for-profit and voluntary organizations in Israel, and with Jewish communities in different parts of the world. The Jewish community of Indianapolis was instrumental in bringing Soviet Jews who were escaping the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s to settle in this community. And today, Jews are participating in the process and contributing to settling Afghanis, Muslims in Indianapolis. The notion of redeeming captives is a very important principle in Jewish life. Sandy and my wife Sandy and I, along with Cantor Melissa and George Kelly, this past week visited the Afghani refugees in Camp Atterbury. We did a program with them. We brought them contributions from the synagogue. We let them know that we care. There were 7,000 refugees in Atterbury. They're down to about 3,000. They have begun to move them in different directions. It's an incredibly organized effort. And I know that we criticize government, and we should often criticize government. But when I was there, I was in awe of what the Homeland Security and the different agencies of our government have been able to do to help people. So, Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world, is the key concept at work in all that I'm talking about. Tikkun Olam is a Hebrew expression that has come to mean the repair of the world, making the world better. According to the Jewish tradition, God did not create the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. The world is still in the process of being created. The first Shabbat was a pause. And after that, we undertake the process as creatures in the image of God of completing the work of creation.
So, Rabbi, that means that's really new to me. That means really it's not a static fact, it's just an evolution.
Absolutely. The process of creation is an ongoing process. And the Jewish tradition considers human beings partners of God in the completion of the work of creation and in the completion of the process of redemption, making the world what it is possible for it to become. I don't like to say what it is intended to be, because that sounds very fatalistic, deterministic. No, what it is possible to become. Okay. If you were to ask me what is the fundamental meaning of belief in God, I would say belief in God is faith in possibility. That things are not static, things are not finished, that where you are is not where you have to stay, that what is not what ought. So God,
very strong.
God for me is the ought of life. So
the world of possibilities, you mean? The world of possibilities.
yes, the word of by the word possibility, I mean that there is always inherent in a situation room for improvement, and that reality is not and never has been static. And even when we think that we are caught at a personal level, and that applies not just to society and science and all that, it applies to us personally. Many situations we feel that that's it, we've reached the end of the road, we are stuck, we are caught, right? I think that ultimately the meaning of faith, the meaning of religion is there is room. And sometimes you have to live with it. But even with living with it, there is room. You're not fixed. And then we have to help create that, because we have to make for people who are stuck openings, possibilities. We could leave those immigrants and refugees in Camp Atterbury. Okay, we took you out there, you are, here's some food. No, you create possibilities. You make them self-capable, self-reliant. So religion is all about possibility. There's another word that stands for religion in my vocabulary, and here I follow the lead of Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionism. Kaplan would say that the secular term for religion is responsibility, another R. Religion means responsibility to others, to yourself, to the past, to the future. And that is what community is all about. Community is the setting within which we create room for possibility, for options. And in community, we realize that no one person has all the answers, and that we can learn from one another and listen. And I'll close with this, because it brings us back to the very beginning. What is the central affirmation of Judaism? Shema, Israel. Hear, O Israel. Listen, O Israel. So word Shema is the distinctive characteristic of being Jewish. Listening, being attentive. And the word Shema in biblical Hebrew does not just mean an auditory, physical experience. The word Shema means understand, seek to understand. So I'll leave you with that. Continue to listen and continue to help others listen to what you might have to say and be part of the ongoing conversation. I said to the young people at services on Friday evening when we presented to them with the prayer book, their first prayer book. And I said, the most important text in the Jewish tradition is the Torah because of its antiquity. But the Torah is the first word of a dialogue beginning with God and the people Israel. The prayer book is the continuation of that conversation through the generations. The Torah text is finished, but the prayer book is an ongoing text and conversation to which we keep adding the memories, the reflections, the yearnings, the hopes, the pains, the joys of every generation, including ours. So the prayer book is an unfinished text, and Judaism is an unfinished product, and you are its actors. So thank you very much. It's been fun conversing with you and learning with you, and I hope that you will find time to continue to read and learn and participate. And I see that Jackie posted there Sharon Hines' address for you to let her know if you're interested in being contacted for continuing with the process of preparation for conversion. Have a happy Hanukkah, everybody. And we are doing the lighting of the menorah at the JCC this evening. We hear we're going to have some rain, but let's see what happens.
Okay.
And everyone, I would like to tell you, I